stuff. Like Kaspersky knows how to do good events.
How's that?
There's always vodka. All right, there we go. Give it up for Jason and Shanna.
All right, thanks, guys. Yeah, so this is going to be a pretty relaxed talk since it's 3 in the afternoon and everyone's probably a bit zoned out after lunch, I guess. We're just basically going to talk a bit about the attack life cycle, and on the way we got some war stories. What's that?
Buzzword bingo.
Yeah.
Is this working?
I don't think your mic's on.
Get it closer. All right, there we go.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, we got some war stories to share along the way. It'll be a lot of fun. So we'll start with a bit about us. There you go. We'll let Shanna go first.
So, as I said, I've been working as an SE. Before that, I was working with Mandiant in IR. Kind of half a lie now because I'm going back to Mandiant very, very soon, a couple of weeks. I'll be back doing the IR stuff. Couldn't keep away. Yes. You know, like being an SE was kind of all right, sort of. But yeah, so going back to consulting.
We knew she'd come back.
Yeah. And I like playing Destiny.
So there is a theme. The title was data exfiltration in the wild. So we've got Hunter, and I just went with this whole Safari guy. So anyway, I'm a principal consultant with Mandiant. I do most of the incident response stuff. Shanna's coming back to us now, so she'll be getting in on that again.
And he'll still be doing most of the work. So.
Yeah, they usually send me to all the interesting places. So yeah, we'll start with what we see as the #1 threat vector. It comes as no surprise, really. The weakest link is always the people. Spear phishing emails are very effective.
Yeah, it's still 100%, nearly 100% of our gigs we see are the threat vector is a spear phishing email. Someone clicking on a link, open an attachment, stuff like that. It's pretty simple, pretty easy. Still works. If it's ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the other ones that make up the smaller percentages, they're all kind of like manually clicking an executable or something like that. And yeah. So this is probably the meat of what we'll be talking about, which is the attack lifecycle. We'll basically go through each of the stages in the life cycle. Initial compromise, what we see a lot of in a lot of the environments we investigate is that the attackers get through the VPN with valid credentials, usually that they've stolen from a third party, like a vendor or something that provides support. They'll get into their environment, steal some credentials. Then by the time they actually get to their target, they've got valid credentials, and it's very difficult to detect because they're logging in as a normal user would.
Yeah, anyone that's seen us present before, we've talked about a case that we worked on about 12 months or so where the attackers had been in the infrastructure for about 2 years and were just coming in with valid VPN credentials. They dumped the RSA database and went through and picked out the users that didn't have a PIN requirement. So they were just logging on as they willed. Looked like a normal user. We found them because we'd seen the host name associated with their IDP logon in another case, so we picked that up pretty luckily, actually. Sorry? Nice catch. Yeah, it was, luck of the draw,
I mean,
really.
by the time we got there, the attacker knew the IT environment better than the actual IT staff did.
And that's not uncommon.
So we were sort of teaching the IT staff about their own environment, saying, oh, look, the attacker's doing this. And they're like, no, that's not possible. Yeah. We're like, yeah, it is. But yeah, so had we not known that host name, we would never have been able to find them.
Yeah, but just having a bunch of users as well that didn't require PINs for their two-factor authentication was a bit of a fail. Defeats the purpose, right?
So initial compromise, usually through VPN. We do sometimes see the uploading of web shells through things like SQL injection. We've seen some web dev exploits as well.
Yep.
Once they get a web shell up there, then they can move on to the established foothold stage.
For us, it's kind of hard sometimes seeing the initial compromise because it's happened years ago. So often when we go in, we're well past the initial compromise stage. So we're like, just take a guess. Probably it was something like this, but yeah.
The most memorable example of that for me is I did an investigation once where there was a website defacement at a big company overseas, and they called me in, and I sort of got there and had a look at this server. And the attackers, there were multiple groups of attackers in this environment, and they'd been there for at least like 4 or 5 years. And they'd obviously got what they wanted from the server, so they just defaced the website and left.
I was here.
Yeah. So yeah, establishing a foothold is basically where they drop things like backdoors and yeah, basically maintain, if they do get kicked out, have a way to get back in. Where we see a lot of stuff is the escalate privileges stage. There's a lot of use of...
Refer to the previous presentation.
What's that?
Sorry, it was a joke. Escalate privileges.
Oh, yeah, of
Sorry.
course.
Really bad, I know, it's like 3:15 or something. Hey.
So yeah, a lot of the time it's Mimikatz or a variant of Mimikatz. They'll have a slightly modified version so that it avoids AV detection. They'll make their way to a domain controller, dump all the credentials, and then
Yeah.
move laterally from there.
My favorite one was China Chopper with WC.
Yeah,
Through China
we'll be
Chopper.
talking a bit about China Chopper a bit later as well.
Also one of my favorites.
Kerberos Golden Ticket Attack, if anyone's familiar with that, basically once they get onto the domain controller, they can take control of the ticket granting account, and then basically authenticate with any administrative account they want, even if the password's changed. So we do see that still sometimes. Yep. It's less common now, but it still appears.
Then you have to reset 3 times, like going home, kicking your heel 3 times.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm the bad joke girl for this afternoon.
So once they do hit the domain controller, we've seen a lot of the times they start port scanning to try and work out what's around the network, do their reconnaissance. Then they move laterally through things like WMI, which I think was spoken about in the last talk as well. Windows management instrumentation. Which is beautiful for attackers because a lot of people don't actually understand much about WMI. They just know that it's there, and it leaves very little artifacts for forensic investigation. Previous methods, they would have to use things like VB scripts and all kinds of things that leave things all over the file system that you can then track down.
PSExec as well.
PSExec is a really good one as well because it's a tool that most sysadmins use on a regular basis. So if we sort of look for PSExec activity, we're going to find heaps of it because it's all over the environment.
A favorite for us is, so when we do investigations, we use an agent on a host. So often you get the customer saying, hey, we'll push it out with PSExec. No, please don't do that. Please don't do that. So yeah, we run into a few things like that where admins use PSExec as well. So it becomes very difficult to determine what's attacker activity and what's actual admin activity. And most times the customer doesn't really know either. Yeah, that's legitimate. And
we encourage investigators to set themselves up a separate domain administrative account for doing investigation because we find a lot of the times we get in there and the admins have then poked around to try and investigate what happened under the same user account.
Admin credentials. Yeah.
So that when we go and investigate, we sort of track down this activity and then realize, oh no, wait, that was a sysadmin under the same account. So it just makes things a lot more difficult for us. Yeah, so once they move laterally, then they're looking to maintain persistence, placing web shells around.
Yeah, web shells, backdoors.
Yeah, basically ways for them to get in. Obviously, once they get valid credentials, they won't use any of the web shells. They'll just log in under these valid credentials. But if they ever reset the passwords on those accounts, they want to way back in so that they can regain their foothold.
And they'll come back in every 3 months or so, make sure they've got the most up-to-date password dumps and stuff like that, and move around using SMB a lot.
If we go back to the example we were talking about, where the attackers were in there for a couple of years, they were so comfortable with the environment. They would just log in every. It was like a schedule. They would have like a monthly schedule. They would just log in, get an updated data set, and then just get out.
This is why it was very fortunate for us to find that actual login because it's they did it once every 2-3 months. So it was pretty lucky that we were on that system looking for things when they actually did log in and we found them.
They happened to log in while we were investigating, so that was good for us.
Yeah. There was a lot of hurraying in our office, but not so much at the customer.
So we'll move on from the life cycle. We'll talk a bit about strategic web compromise.
guys know
We've-
Scanbox? Yay, nay, maybe?
Everyone's asleep?
Yeah.
Cool. So Scanbox is really cool because it actually doesn't leave any artifacts on the system. Everything's taken place server side. And it's just a reconnaissance tool. So Scanbox won't actually deliver any malicious payload or anything. It's just to determine possible exploits that might be on that system, looking at things like Adobe Flash versions.
So we've
Just-
seen, Australian websites, and now I can talk a bit louder, Australian websites compromised with Scanbox. And they tend to choose very strategic sites that they want to compromise. So if, potentially if they're looking to compromise financial services, they'll compromise a website that those employees are more likely to go and visit. Then they'll grab the information. They get stuff like versions of Adobe, versions of AV software. Are they running? What versions of Microsoft they're running and that kind of stuff. Some of the better attackers will then bring their infrastructure down once they've got that information. They kind of don't leave it up there hanging around. But yeah, they can do stuff like keylogging. So if the website's compromised, everything that the user types in that website is actually uploaded to the C2 server. So passwords, usernames, pretty much everything that they enter, anything that's entered into a web form is all uploaded. So, and all this happens without the user having any idea and without there actually being any evidence left on the system itself. So it's kind of a, you go looking for it and it's pretty difficult. So you've got to have some kind of network logging or proxy logging or network packet capture to actually find out who went there and what kind of information they got, potentially, passwords and stuff.
Yeah, proxy logs are probably the most valuable resource for identifying this kind of activity. We'll just have an example of some log entries that we actually found and sanitized from an investigation. I don't know if that's legible from that distance.
Yeah, just looking, base 64 encoded, not very sophisticated, but sophisticated enough that it still gets through. So, looking at passwords, this one in particular, the k.php is actually the keylogger. So the information sent back to the C2 from here is stuff that was entered into a web form on the compromised site.
The next point that we're seeing a lot of is the use of WMI. As I said earlier, it leaves very few artifacts on the system itself. We have since written a tool that parses out the objects.data database of WMI. We can get some commands out of that and things like that. But yeah, I mean, ultimately when we come across this, the best things that we do is look through memory strings to find commands that are being executed. Because we commonly see this used, well actually it can be used for any stage of the attack lifecycle really. But we commonly see it for persistence and for lateral movement because it allows remote execution and leaves very little footprint. So basically for persistence, the attackers will use PowerShell to create this event and trigger paradigm to basically execute their own code. Yeah, so WMI will regularly. What's that, sorry?
So probably can't see that one either. Bit small.
Yeah, we didn't think this through. WMI basically regularly polls the system. It has this event trigger paradigm. They can put their own code in there and it'll be executed on a schedule at a certain when the event is triggered. They can it's base 64. I think it's base 64 encoding. They can just put their own arbitrary code in there and it'll execute. But yeah, we typically see a lot of this used for lateral movement.
And we see it a lot. Pretty much nearly every case we work on, we'll see evidence of this in some form or another.
So we'll go back to China Chopper that we mentioned earlier, which is a really small web shell. We refer to it as the little malware that could, because it's literally like one line.
Yeah, 4 KB.
The payload is like a one-line PHP code or whatever language you prefer.
Yeah, it's really tiny, and we see everything: port scanning, password dumping. What else? Pretty much everything you can do.
Yeah,
you can
reverse
China
shell,
Chopper,
like
yeah.
whatever you
It's,
want.
It's pretty nasty for a one-line piece of code.
Yeah, so it's in two pieces. You've got the binary component, which is your client, and there's a payload that sits on the web server, which is basically one line of text, which means that an attacker really, all they need to do is like type it in by hand. They don't need any scripts or anything to drop the malware. It'll just sit there and basically take a post parameter and just execute it. So they can, this is what the client looks like. I don't know if, that's really
Yeah, it's
not
pretty
very
hard to
good at
see.
all. But did I put it? Yeah, I'll just skip that one because you can't really read it. Basically, the payload looks like that example there. I don't know if you can read that from where you're sitting, but it's basically just eval request item, and they often have a password component as well, so that only they can use the web shell, I guess.
Yeah, maybe basics to forward encoding as well, but again, it's not really that tricky to decode that.
But it's in a variety of languages. It's basically just an eval command. But the capabilities are really strong. There's a file management component which basically gives them the ability to browse the web server.
Yeah, and they've got two different versions, one for Windows, one for Linux. So in the Linux one, that's for MySQL. The Windows one's for MS SQL as well. So they've got database administration tools.
The file management tool, the component of the client also allows them to change timestamps, so that if they're dropping files, they can then timestamp those files and make it harder for an analyst to find them.
Yeah, and obviously the main topic of our talk was data exfiltration, and yeah, China Chopper is pretty easy. When you look at the GUI, you have to do is right click and you save the file. It's kind of a bit of a no-brainer.
We see it all the time. Not only do we see the web shell used all the time, but we see this scanning activity where they'll just smash a web server looking for examples of China Chopper, and usually they're 404, but they're just...
Yeah, if they had a web shell on there at some stage, they'll be back looking for it pretty frequently and testing other servers. So if you shut it down, you can still see them coming back and then trying different parameters, maybe in this page. They're pretty persistent in trying to get back in.
But yeah, database management and virtual terminal, which is also really powerful. It's basically a reverse shell in the box. Depending on what user account the web shell's running under, then they can potentially do a lot of damage with that. Yeah, that's basically all we had. Was there any questions?
Yeah, so short and sweet.